Should we start? Good evening. Can I start today, right now? Perfect. Good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining Chicago Medical Society's Town Hall Trusted Messenger campaign. I'm Vishnu Chandi. I'm the chair of the COVID-19 task force. With us tonight, we have Dr. Edward Lin, as well as Dr. Daniel Johnson from the University of Chicago. A couple of things that what is the Trusted Messenger campaign? It's actually a campaign that involves several trusted messengers. Chicago Medical Society is creating a multifaceted campaign which involves the sports teams, as well as trusted messengers, which include physicians, the clergy, as well as other people in the community, which would include even barbershops, which are trusted in their localities. We want to bring on sports figures because they are a great source of basically communication to the campaign, which includes Latinx as well as the African American community. There's a significant reluctance, it looks like, amongst several key demographics, which seem to be the most affected by COVID-19. If you look at the demographics of where the mortality lies, it's predominantly amongst Latinx, African American population, where mortality is significant. So tonight, we're trying to reach out to our own folks, physicians, as well as other healthcare professionals, to talk about the vaccines, and answer questions that they themselves may have. So Dr. Jansen's going to start tonight and talk about what is the RNA vaccine, so we're clear about what we know and what we don't know. So Dr. Johnson.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chandi, and I'm happy to echo his thanks as well for all of you who have decided to spend your evening tonight learning a little bit more about the vaccine. Do I have control of the slides, or Ruby, is that you?
It's me, so it's Natalie.
Okay, yeah, if you could advance to the next slide then. Great. So what you see before you is a cartoon drawing of the way in which an mRNA vaccine is intended to work. This particular mRNA vaccine is encoded with a lipid membrane. And the reason why it's encoded with a lipid membrane is because if you inject naked mRNA, it can get to cells, but generally speaking, it's so destroyed along the way that you have to use very large quantities in order to get enough of the mRNA into the host cell. But if you can decode it, so to speak, with a lipid membrane, then that protects it on its route to the cell. And then, as you can see in the drawing here, fuses with the cell membrane and is engulfed in an endosome. The endosome then breaks down inside the cell. In turn, the lipid membrane breaks down, much as the same idea as the candy coating on M&Ms, protects it in your hand, but once it gets in your mouth, it breaks down. The same thing is happening inside the host cell. The mRNA then, of course, does its work at the level of the ribosome, producing the necessary proteins that then can be secreted, as well as act as transmembrane proteins that lead to a host response. Next slide. Thank you. As you can see, that was my reminder about the candy coat. So what happens then with this RNA vaccine is it's injected intramuscularly. It's taken up by both muscle cells as well as by antigen-presenting cells, and does exactly what I described already, which is that it leads to the production of proteins. Those proteins act as antigens. You could advance the slide. Thank you. And that leads to a broad-based immune response. As you can see, CD8 cells, B cells, and CD4 cells all leading to generation of a broad-based immune response. I should point out that the RNA does not enter the host nucleus. There is no way in which that RNA template can be made into DNA in order to get into the host cell. So this is one of the things that's been very important to people, I think, to hear over and over again, is that this RNA does not in any way alter the host genome. It can't. And as a consequence, it will not in any way affect the host genes. The other thing that I think is important to mention before I turn things over to Dr. Chunde is that the RNA breaks down, and in fact, in kinetic studies, it shows that the RNA is all gone by 10 to 14 days. So this does not remain with the host, only thankfully the immune response does. So, Dr. Chunde?
Thank you, Dr. Johnson. So I'll repeat the beginning because we have a lot more people who've joined the call. So thank you all for coming. And Dr. Johnson just went over how mRNA vaccines work. The COVID task force main goal tonight is to make sure that our trusted messengers have the facts so they can talk to their communities as they go out, and we create a slide set for them to use, which will be out within the next few days. The task force will have the trusted messenger component of it will have a multifaceted campaign, which involves social media. It also involves several of the local sports teams. It'll become sort of an organic way for folks to reach out to their communities and get vaccine acceptance. There's a significant amount of vaccine hesitancy. Chicago Medical Society did a survey amongst its members, and we had over 1,000 respondents. And at that time, about 39% of physicians were vaccine hesitant. That means they were not saying no. We had about 4% that would said no, but the rest of the folks were like, let's wait and see, which seems to be a common theme. I'm going to wait for other people to get it and then decide if I really want it, which is not a unusual response. And we want to change that to yes, we want to take the vaccine, and we want our physicians, our healthcare professionals to become the folks who carry the flag for the vaccine. So the structure of tonight will be, I will go through a series of slides about the vaccine, about COVID and how it was developed, and try to get rid of some of the big myths that are out there. The last, Dr. Lin will follow about talking about basically the breastfeeding aspect of it, and do you give it to pregnant women? And then the last part about will be a question and answers session. So let's get started. First slide. So the goals are to become a vaccine advocate. And the Trusted Messenger campaign is nothing new that we've created. This has been going on for some time. We have a significant amount of vaccine distrust. In fact, as we speak, much like you saw the mob towards the election last week, it's already been a week. It feels like a month. The vaccination has a significant amount of anti-vaxxers out there who are equally motivated, and they're very, it's actually well organized. And they're already bringing out these myths about this vaccine, which include things like, it changes your DNA, which it does not. It makes you, it causes loss of fetus, which it does not. And so we're going to talk about, try to get everyone to become a vaccine advocate. And this would include physicians, celebrities, social influencers, and specific to communities. African-American communities, barbershops apparently are a large source of dissemination of information in the neighborhoods. And in the Hispanic community, Spanish-speaking celebrities also are an important key. So we should understand mRNA vaccines and be comfortable communicating with your patient and your constituents. Become an expert and be armed with knowledge to explain the myths and fallacies, to convert this vaccine hesitant to vaccine acceptance. Next slide. So I'm going to bring two cases on because you hear a lot of folks, including Rand Paul, who's an ophthalmologist, and he was out there talking about how natural immunity is so important and natural immunity is superior to vaccination. In every single aspect, he's wrong there. Natural immunity has significantly more side effects. So if you get herd immunity by natural infections, you'll have a lot more deaths in the community. And it has a lot more side effects. So the first case is a 42-year-old gentleman who had 8 days of fevers and cough and shortness of breath. He had well-controlled diabetes. And this gentleman progressed on to have high flow, had being put on BiPAP and intubated, and eventually got extracorporeal membrane organization, complicated by Bavara trauma, and eventually required a lung transplant. So a patient we took care of several months ago. He's doing okay. This other patient I just saw this weekend, which was very interesting. Dr. Johnson had to go, but this was a 19-year-old young lady who presented to the intensive care unit basically in septic shock. She was hypotensive, shocky, and she developed a faint erythematous rash on her legs. She was very toxic. The rest of her exam was unremarkable. And she came in with a high bilirubin, had a white count of 9,000, and had low platelet count, and for all practical purposes, looked like she was in extremis from septic shock. Interestingly, when one of my partners tested her for COVID antibodies, she came back with COVID. So she had a remote exposure to COVID, and she developed what is considered this multi-systemic inflammatory syndrome. And with a short course of steroids, she completely resolved and went home. So even in young people who get natural COVID infection, you can have severe consequences such as this. Next slide. Natalie, next slide. Oh, there you go. So much higher. So the natural infections have a much higher incidence of complications these compared to vaccines. That's why we have diphtheria, tetanus, polio, measles vaccine, and now we have COVID. There are many other vaccines, and so the vaccines have a much lower incidence of side effects. They don't have a zero incidence of side effects. If you take measles vaccine, for example, 1 in 3.5 to 4 million people who get measles vaccine can have subacute panencephalitis, but it's much lower than a natural measles infection, which is about 1 in 700,000. And same thing goes with diphtheria and tetanus. Vaccines are always safer than herd immunity by natural infection. Thus, we have vaccinations. So the paradigm is different with vaccines compared to treatment. So when you treat people with medicines, the safety doesn't have to be as high as vaccination. Why? When we vaccinate people, we're vaccinating healthy people. And so all vaccines must undergo rigorous trials. And this vaccine underwent a very vigorous trial. Next slide. So what does this vaccine do? Basically, Dr. Johnson went over this. It does not, the mRNA vaccine technology has been developed over a quarter of a century. It's nothing that happened over 6 months as this warp speed, which is an unfortunate moniker that they use to call the whole project. The warp speed is by basically how they've gotten into production. But mRNA vaccines have been around for about 25 years. They were originally developed for oncology and HIV. It didn't work out so well for HIV. It's still currently one of the more promising technologies for oncology. It needs a transport mechanism so your body doesn't destroy it. And as Dr. Johnson pointed out in the slides earlier, they use this M&M approach of having a coating, which is a lipid coating, a pegylated coating, to bring it in so to present to your cytosol, not to your nucleus of your cell, and it creates the RNA, which then your body creates antigens and antibodies, and eventually T cell immunity, so you get active immunity. Next slide. So how did all this happen? And it basically has to do with serendipity. The two companies that you're seeing now, Moderna and BioNTech, that's the Pfizer vaccine. BioNTech, both of these developed the Zika vaccine. Remember Zika? It was like this horrible thing that was going to go on out there, and it was causing tremendous amount of fetal damage and these kids being born with neurological deficits. Well, Zika was thought to become the next big pandemic. And Moderna and BioNTech developed these RNA vaccines to inoculate the world. And when they came out with this vaccine and spent $1 billion on it, Zika went away. And the reason why Zika went away is was one of the great mysteries till they figured it out. And it had to do with another viral infection, dengue, which is currently is a huge pandemic throughout the world. And it has a common mosquito vector, the Aedes aegypti mosquito. And dengue basically occupies the same receptor site as Zika. And so Zika was out, uh, you know, it basically got blocked out by dengue. And so they had a huge vaccine with nothing to do with it because there wasn't much Zika going around. And lo and behold, SARS-2 comes around and the platform is already developed. They have the lipid bilayer and they were simply able to quickly manufacture the antibody because within the Chinese released the whole gene sequencing of the SARS-CoV-2 early, and then within 6 days we knew what the antigenic portions were, and the NIH already had a vast research network trial experience to conduct a trial, and they were able to get this ongoing. The federal government took the risks for Pfizer as well as other Moderna and said we're going to produce the vaccine as we're basically going out and testing it. The federal approval process and the safety requirements were unchanged. It's a misspelling there. So the vaccine was rigorously trialed. Next slide. So this is one of the great myths that this vaccine is not safe because it was pushed out so quickly. Well, the trial actually had large amounts of participants. This was no change per what normal trials are done, but you had so many people infected that you were able to quickly get 43,000 participants in the Pfizer vaccine, over 30,000 participants in the Moderna vaccine. As you can see, very safe vaccine with no major side effects during the trial. And either they had some anaphylactoid reactions. Even now, with over 10 million doses, we've not had any deaths. There is a report yesterday of one physician passing away. Whether it was related to vaccine or not is being investigated. And the effective rate, if you ask the infectious disease world how effective you thought these vaccines were going to be, people were guessing 70, 80%. This was 95%, which blew away everybody. And it's because of the technology. The mRNA technology is absolutely one of the best types of technology for vaccines. Next slide. So this was a week ago, 3.2 million doses, now over 6 million. Today it's over 10 million doses. So the amount of people getting vaccinated are increasing very rapidly. We're starting to ramp up with 3.2 million doses. They had 21 anaphylactoid reactions, and there was no Guillain-Barré, no transverse myelitis. Now, as a person who's received 2 doses of this vaccine, it does kick you in your tuchus with your second dose and even the first dose. So you have a significant amount of chills, headaches, lymphadenopathy. So go to the next slide. The vaccine requires a significant amount of storage. The Pfizer vaccine requires -70 degrees. It requires 2 doses. It's good for 5 days at -20. And once you open the vaccine dose, which has about 10 doses, you have to use it within a few hours. The Moderna vaccine is -20. It's easier to use because most doctors' offices can use the Moderna vaccine. The ultra cold storage is a problem with the Pfizer vaccine. Both of these vaccines cannot be interchanged because the Pfizer vaccine is at the receptor binding domain as well as the S protein, and the Moderna vaccine basically uses the S2 segment of the glycoprotein. Next slide. So these are very, very, very safe vaccines. The Pfizer vaccine has basically pain at the injection site, and you get regional adenopathy. Multiple members in our group who received both doses felt lymph nodes in their neck as well as the axilla in both the Moderna as well as the Pfizer vaccine. The big thing that I felt personally was how tired you get after the second dose. I had chills, and rigors, but no real fever, and significant body aches and myalgias with a headache, which lasted for about 8 hours, and it was sudden onset. But it was basically not a big deal. It wasn't as bad as getting a typhoid vaccine or actually your tetanus diphtheria vaccine. They were very similar sort of effects. Next slide. So here are the indications. The Pfizer vaccine is indicated for people over 16. That's where it was tested. Currently, they're testing pediatric age population. The dose is smaller. It's a 30 microgram dose between 1 and 22 days. The earlier, if you give it early, 15 days, you don't give, or 14 days, you don't give the vaccine the ability to prime, so your effective rate will come down from 95%. If you give it beyond 28 days, you lose about 1% efficacy per week. So it doesn't mean don't give it. It means you should probably, you should be aware that your efficacy is going to come down. So if you give it on day 28 or day 30 something, your efficacy is going to be 92%, not 95%. There's no difference in efficacy based on race. Protection starts about on day 10 after first dose. And if you don't give a second dose, as what the British are talking about, the protectivity is probably around 50% or higher, but you can't quote everyone on that until studies are done. The Pfizer vaccine is a little less likely to give you a headache compared to the Moderna vaccine, and the Pfizer vaccine has a little bit greater efficacy in people over 65. The Moderna vaccine is 100 micrograms. It's a different dosing schedule, day 1 and day 29. Over age of 65, it has an efficacy of about 86%. And protection starts really after the second dose. The Pfizer vaccine has a protection that starts a little bit earlier. And it's protective against severe disease and death. Next slide. And you can see the first slide and the second slide, which are from the FDA approval. The blue line is placebo. And you can see from the first slide that the vaccine really starts to give you protection around day 8. And before you get the second dose, you have about a 50%, 60% efficacy. Whereas the Moderna vaccine really doesn't start taking off for efficacy until you get to day 20 something. Next slide. So what are trusted messengers? So trusted messengers are people who act. So people act when they trust. And who do people trust? In the local community, it's the physicians. It's the physicians and nurses who have the most credibility amongst folks in the area. People don't trust government. This is really an example of a postmodern society. People don't trust the elected officials. They trust local physicians, they trust the school nurses, they trust the pastors, they trust community leaders, and in African-American communities, they trust, interestingly, barbershops where a lot of political discussion and everything else takes place. In India, where I come from, in our village, most of the discussion takes place under the banyan tree, believe it or not. Everyone sits in the morning, reads a newspaper, and you get a tremendous amount of political discourse there. So context is very important. It's political, it's social, and it's in an experiential context. When I talk about myself getting the vaccine, that's an important way to communicate to folks that that you do have some side effects, but it's manageable. Nobel Prize winning economics professor Abhijit Banerjee said peer effect is real and it works. Whether what you buy, which is what Amazon uses to make you buy things, or getting the word out as an agent of change. Everyone is taking the vaccine. Everyone is talking about the vaccine. That's why the sports figures are important as trusted messengers. If you get LeBron James to talk about getting the vaccine and showing that he takes the vaccine, you can have a million Dr. Chundis. He's going to be more effective than a million Dr. Chundis. And even though Dr. Lin is fabulous and dynamic, LeBron James will have more effect on that population. Next slide. So the frequently asked questions that you get is, if I had COVID, do I need a vaccine? I get that question all the time. I had COVID from our physicians. I had COVID in March and April. Why do I need to take the vaccine? That's a great question. Well, yes, because COVID immunity wanes, and natural immunity wanes faster than vaccine immunity. And not everyone who gets SARS-CoV-2, COVID-19 develops immunity. 20 to 30% may not develop immunity. So the vaccine is necessary. And that's, even though I myself had COVID, and I think in April, I got my vaccine. Will the vaccine alter my DNA? The answer is no. The RNA does not enter the nucleus, and it does not alter your DNA. Will the vaccine make me sick with COVID? And the answer is absolutely not. You don't get COVID-19 from the vaccine. It does make you feel feverish. And the difference between having COVID, and I've had several folks who've gotten the vaccine first dose, and then they got a real COVID infection in between. COVID infection is I lose my sense of smell, I lose my sense of taste, I have upper respiratory symptoms, whereas the vaccine side effects are I have pain in my arm, I have body aches, I have muscle aches. You know, you don't get the loss of sense of smell or taste, scratchy throat, upper respiratory infection, and lower respiratory shortness of breath. You don't get that with the vaccine. Will the vaccine turn my COVID test positive? I'm talking about the PCR test. It will not turn your COVID PCR test positive. It may turn your antibody test positive depending on the type of antibody that you get. Next slide. So quickly, I want to talk about the two types of variants that are out there because we're getting a lot of questions on these. You know, if you saw the press the last week and a half, everybody was talking about the South African variant. Everybody was talking actually more about the British variant. So the British variant is called the UKB117 strain. And why is that important? If you saw the huge outbreak that's going on in the UK as well as Europe and other countries, this variant is more infective than the prior variant, which is different than the variant that was in Wuhan. The SARS-CoV-2, SARS virus, which is a beta coronavirus. There's alpha, beta, gamma coronaviruses. A beta coronavirus is a very stable virus. It has a reading sequence which corrects, unlike HIV, unlike influenza, and it does not vary very much. It has about one major mutation a month, okay? But this B117 had multiple mutations from one person, and it's more infective than the prior mutation. And so it infects more people with lesser amount of virions. It is not more pathogenic, so it doesn't kill anybody anymore. But if you have many more people infected, you are going to have more deaths. And they think that's what's driving the increased amount of infections in the United Kingdom. Both the variants, so the South African variant is known as the B1351 strain, and B1351 strain, interestingly, has a different mutation. It has the 501Y V2 variant, but it also has the E484K and the K4117N mutation. These variants may, and I use the word may, interfere with more vaccine effectiveness, but both the vaccines still work very well against this vaccine. Right now, everybody's working with a fever pitch with trying to get this to see if this vaccine, how effective the vaccine is, and we'll have more data within the next few weeks. Next slide. So the vaccine is safe. The vaccine is effective. It requires a complex cold chain. It's 2 doses and they can't be interchanged. And we right now have about 150 million people in this country can receive the vaccine. We bought enough of it. And I think the Trump administration bought another 50 million doses of the Pfizer vaccine. So we're up to 200 million doses. We have about 340 million people in this country who total. So you're going to be short about 140 million doses. Now, why are we short 150 million doses? Well, the Johnson & Johnson vaccine, which is coming up, which hopefully will be approved by April, the latest June, they're scheduled to make an additional 100 million doses, which should cover this shortfall, provided it's efficacious. So the preliminary data is that it is efficacious. They're having some problems with production because you got to understand the production is going on right now as we're speaking, and the trial should be done. So we'll have more information soon. Next slide. So what are the known unknowns? How long will the vaccine protect you? We think at least a year, maybe longer. Will the vaccine prevent transmission of infection? We do think it does prevent transmission of infection, but we don't think that it's going to prevent, you still may carry it, much like measles vaccine. Even if you have a measles vaccine, you may carry the virus. And use in children, currently the trials are going on, and use in pregnancy and lactation. Dr. Lin is going to talk about this, but natural infection in pregnancy and lactation, which does occur, is much worse than vaccine, than if you get the vaccine. So the ACOG as well as maternal fetal medicine have come out with statements that Dr. Lin's going to talk about. Long-term side effects, most vaccine reactions occur within 6 weeks, especially in subunit vaccines. So we think it's not going to have tremendous amount of side effects, but as more and more people get vaccine, we're going to see what exactly happens with this vaccine. the anaphylactic reactions that you're seeing. So people have severe anaphylaxis. They should not be taking this vaccine, and you should probably wait for the other vaccines to come out. It looks like the lipid bilayer, which is the main component that's causing these anaphylactic reactions. But we haven't had any deaths from the anaphylactic reactions. If you do have reactions that are major, you should be watched for 30 minutes, not 15 minutes in the doctor's office. Next slide. And what are the unknowns? We don't know what are the other uncommon side effects. So there's two reporting mechanisms, which is the Vaccine Adverse Event Reporting System and vSafe, which is an app, which you should download when you get your vaccine. And then Guillain-Barré. Everybody asks you about Guillain-Barré. There's very little evidence that this vaccine is associated with Guillain-Barré. We haven't had any cases yet that are reported. We checked in with the FDA about 4 or 5 days ago, and from our group, and they have not reported any. We haven't had any transverse myelitis. There is a unusual sensory myelopathy. I shouldn't call it a myelopathy. A sensory side effect that's been reported now in 3 or 4 people with numbness in the contralateral side that is yet to be published. So that's one of the minor side effects that we're looking at. And then next slide. I think Dr. Lin. You're on, Dr. Lin. Unmute yourself.
Thank you very much, Dr. Chandi. Always learn something from you. Again, I want to thank the Medical Society for making this event possible, and I have urged all of you who are interested in working with us to be able to sign up for our Trusted Messenger program. I have my first slide. So I want to reiterate what was basically said, that vaccines are one of the greatest public health achievements in the 20th century. And before the widespread use of vaccines, people routinely died from infectious diseases, several of which have been eradicated thanks to robust immunization programs. Now, just to make a comment, because we are in the field who deal with reproductive age women and pregnant women, realize that vaccination has been a very important strategy in modern obstetrics. There are numerous infections which are not handled well by the pregnant woman, and some that actually are embryopathic and will affect the fetus. What I don't have, and what I think everyone is kind of struggling with a little bit, is I don't have randomized controlled trials, level 1 evidence with this new novel COVID-19 vaccine. But that data will be forthcoming through observation, not through randomized controlled trials, because clearly women are becoming pregnant who've been vaccinated, and hopefully these are being recorded, and there is a database for that. The important thing to stress is that this COVID infection is not something which a pregnant woman should trivialize, and the people who are providing care for these people. The American College of OB/GYN, the Society for Maternal Fetal Medicine, have pretty much come up in unison with these recommendations, which I'm going to be summarizing for you. And realizing that even on a theoretical basis, and we know that this vaccine is safe, and we expect this vaccine to continue to be safe in a pregnant woman. And the mRNA technology, because a lot of people hear RNA, they hear nucleotides, and they get nervous about it. Remember, unlike other vaccines we've used, it is not a live virus, it's not an attenuated virus. So it doesn't have any potential to cause subclinical infection. It is just simply a group of codes that will stimulate the host cell to produce the protein associated with the spike region on the virion, and thereby stimulate an immune response against these proteins. And it is therefore felt that it is quite safe. May I have the next slide, please? So the current recommendations is that the COVID-19 vaccine should not be withheld from pregnant individuals who meet the criteria for vaccination based on the ACIP recommended priority groups. So healthcare professionals are being urged right now to get their vaccines, and as part of the 1A. 1B is hopefully going to take off next week and expand it to other individuals. And again, I'm reiterating what ACOG says here. While safety data on the use of COVID-19 vaccines in pregnancy are not currently available, there's also no data to indicate that the vaccine should be contraindicated. And no safety signal generated from the DART studies from Pfizer or BioNTech vaccine we have to be concerned about. Obviously, ACOG is advocating for the pregnant woman, and clearly women need to be free to make their own decision in conjunction with their clinical care team. But individuals considering a vaccine should have access to the available information about the safety and efficacy of the vaccine, including information about data that are not available. And much of this material is available on the American College of OBGYN website. And we also have some material that we've posted on the CMS website too. Next slide, please. Now, when individuals are considering, so we're entering into the counseling phase of vaccine, they should have access to the data as we stated. And a conversation between the patient and their clinical team may assist the decision regarding the use of vaccines approved under the emergency use authorization for the prevention of COVID by pregnant patients. So these are some of the things you may want to discuss with the patient. What is the level of activity of the virus in the community? You know, fortunately, we're seeing a little downturn in the Chicagoland area. I'm hoping that it persists, but certainly in areas like Southern California, where they're having a great deal of difficulty with this, and in certain neighborhoods in the city of Chicago compared to certain suburban neighborhoods. The opportunity to acquire the infection naturally while pregnant poses, I think, a significant risk. And just like we strongly recommend influenza vaccine while pregnant, because the benefit appears to be much greater than the risk. Similarly, we're recommending Tdap vaccination, a little different type of vaccines, but again, because the downside risk is definitely dwarfed by the upside of trying to prevent these infections. The risk of potential severe maternal disease, including the effects of the disease on the fetus and the newborn, have to be weighed into it. Women tend to be sicker while they're pregnant, and this is to be biologically attributable to the blunting of the natural immune response during pregnancy. May I have the next slide, please? Now, ACOG recommends the vaccines be offered to lactating individuals, similar to non-lactating individuals, when they meet criteria for the receipt of the vaccine based on prioritization groups outlined by the ACIP. Even though lactating individuals were not included in the clinical trials, we don't recommend withholding these things while lactating because there doesn't appear to be any physiologic reason to do so. There's always theoretical concerns regarding the safety of vaccinating a lactating individual. But again, as I stated with being pregnant, the potential benefits of receiving the vaccine clearly outweigh these concerns. There is no need to avoid initiation or to discontinue breastfeeding in patients who receive the COVID vaccine. Remember, this is a very short-lived mRNA, little lipid-coated nanosphere that's given to the patient. It's incorporated quickly. It only stays for a few days, as pointed out. And the end result is the generation of proteins, which are then the immune system will stimulate both T cells as well as production of globulins. And there's no reason to suspect that these would be harmful to the patient or to the baby that's receiving the breast milk. Next slide, please. So you're also going to be faced with discussions about patients who are saying, well, we're trying to get pregnant. we're planning to get pregnant. Should I hold off? This is not like when we inoculate for rubella. We inoculate for rubella, we explicitly tell the patient to avoid getting pregnant for a minimum of 3 months. Well, we're not talking about that. The patient should go on, in the opinion of ACOG and other experts, and I'll include myself in that group, is that you can go ahead and actively, you can also vaccinate women who are actively trying to get pregnant. And it's not necessary to delay. And if the patient becomes pregnant after the first dose, the second dose should be administered as indicated. You know, we're not waving anybody off. I mean, this is, we're trying to prevent them from getting sick. Because again, dealing with the clinical infection, we think is far worse than dealing with these theoretical concerns from the vaccine. In addition to the programs that have been talked about, there is also the CDC's vSafe program, which is it's an app that can be downloaded, and the patient could be recording their reaction. We're encouraging this because this is how we're going to accumulate the data that we need. I believe I have completed my discussion. Can I see the next slide, please? So I want to leave, we're going to leave this slide up for you. We're urging everyone who's participating in this program tonight to join our Trusted Messenger program. And the website link is here. And it was also posted in the chat for people that can look in the chat room and be able to sign up for this, because we feel that you have a unique opportunity to be able to reach patients, especially patients who have given you their trust in caring for them, to convey this message about honest interpretation of results and of science, which can be confusing and a little daunting to the public. I believe at this point, we're going to try to answer some questions. Is that true, Dr. Chandy?
Yeah, first, I just wanted to talk a little bit about the trusted messenger, because we as physicians, talk within ourselves and our community, and the talk that you gave, Ed, was really important about pregnancy, because, I was walking into an elevator and one of the nurses actually was pregnant. She goes, "Well, what about getting the vaccine?" I said, "Well, you should get the vaccine according to ACOG." And she goes, "No, it's not what my doctor told me," because she's not sure of the vaccine. And that's fundamentally the message we want to avoid. I think we want to be correct with our facts and what we tell our patients. The second group of folks that we want to reach with our Trusted Messenger service is our communities that we live in. Today I was talking to the Oak Park School District and the District 97, and the teachers had the administration had lots of questions. We previously talked to teachers about this. We've talked to clergy. We've talked to through the elected officials, especially your aldermen and your local elected officials. I urge all of you and CMS with Ted Kanalakis and our staff are going to reach out to these folks for having discussion groups about this. And we hope all of you become trusted messengers, so we have enough people to go out there. So we have hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of physicians, other healthcare workers who can go out and host some of these meetings and have these town halls and be able to get some of this message out there. It's not good enough to talk within ourselves. It's really important to go out and talk to the communities out there. There's a tremendous amount of hesitance amongst African-American population. There's a tremendous, for many reasons we can talk about for hours. There's a tremendous amount of hesitancy amongst the Latina population and Latinx population, as well as other minority populations. So that's the fundamental thrust of this Trusted Messenger service, of where we'd like you to help. I see that Katie Mullane's been on talking about some of these topics, which are really important. And some of the questions that have been out there, one has been about the anaphylaxis. There are questions about if I have a person who's anaphylactic to dye, antibiotics, food allergies, can I take the vaccine? And the answer is yes. The question becomes, how long do you watch? And you should have resuscitative ability for these folks. You just can't if I had anaphylactic patients, I wouldn't want them to go through a drive-through line and get their vaccine and wait in a car. You'd want them to be in a controlled facility like a hospital, and where you have resuscitative capability, at least to get folks to give them epinephrine. So that's one of the questions that was asked out there. So that should not preclude you from getting the vaccine, but you have to be a little extra careful. Food allergies, antibiotic allergies should not interfere with you getting the vaccine. The wait for vaccine after you, if you have any of these histories, is 30 minutes, not 15 minutes. 15 minutes is a standard time that you wait after vaccines, but 30 minutes if you have a history of anaphylaxis. The other questions were related to immune suppression. So if you're on prednisone, one of the questions was, I'm taking prednisone, when can I take the vaccine? Prednisone dose matters as far as uptake of vaccine. Those studies have not been out there, been looking for these to see what the uptake is. Thus far, we've been telling folks who are immunocompromised to take the vaccine, chemotherapy patients. The difficulty, if you look at COVID, is people who secrete virus for a long, long time have been bone marrow transplant patients. Within our own group, when we looked at our bone marrow folks, we've had people with active viral secretions going on for several months with culturable virus. So that group seems to have an inability to fight off the virus because they lack B and T cells. So I'm not sure how their vaccine uptake is going to be, but clearly those folks are the ones that need all of us to have herd immunity, so we don't give them COVID. The biologic group is another group that's out there who are getting lots of biologics and believe they should get vaccinated. With their uptake rates, we don't know. I don't know the data for it. We've been looking for data for it, and I can't find it. So those are the main groups of questions that are out there. There was a question about initially about where the RNA vaccines work. The first slides that we had in the slide deck showed that it does not enter the nucleus, so you don't get changes in your own DNA. I mean, that's a big deal because people keep asking, especially the lay public, as well as interestingly some of the physicians, about altering your DNA. It does not alter your DNA. Then there's a question about if you get monoclonal antibodies, how long do you have to wait to get the vaccine? The 90 days is what's recommended. If you get monoclonal antibodies, there's several monoclonal antibodies out there. Moderna has one, Eli Lilly has one, and there's another third one coming out. And these are very effective if given early before you get hypoxemic. And unfortunately for those, if you take that, then you should wait 90 days before you get vaccinated. And if you're highly immunocompromised, the answer there is you should, one of the options out there is to take monoclonal antibodies because it's very difficult to, I think, elicit an immune response in these folks, but the data are lacking, as it's been pointed out in the conversation. The other questions that were out in the chat included, let's see, as far as titers for the first dose. There's a lot of the British Health Service has been mulling over the thought of giving only one dose of vaccine. There are no data to support what they're saying. That you will get some immunity, and the belief is you'll get more than 50% immunity, which is better than 0%. But that is not the recommendations. We still recommend going out and giving 2 doses. Dr. Lin, there was a lot of chatter out there about placental problems with the vaccine. Can you comment on that?
Yes, I'm not aware of any reputable sources talking about placental problems. I think there was a concern that there may be miscarriages. That was really more associated with the infection, not the vaccine. And there have been reported series of preterm labor or spontaneous terminations of pregnancy associated with it. And and obviously these are isolated case reports, and we just have to realize that some patients get very sick, and this is going to be threatening to themselves as well as the pregnancy. I have to leave shortly to attend another meeting. I did receive an email question regarding this concept that you can still be shedding virus after you've been vaccinated. And I will give you my opinion, and I'm interested in hearing Dr. Chandi's opinion on this. But realizing that the endpoint in the clinical trials was symptomatic infection. And that's where we had this 90% success in preventing symptomatic infection. They weren't sampling everybody who was enrolled in the study to see whether or not they had subclinical infection. And they just were looking for those people that had symptomatic infection. But we know from other vaccines, vaccines do not necessarily eradicate completely acquisition of a virus. In the particular case of the vaccine that's been developed for the COVID, we're talking about preventing the attachment of the virus to the mucous membrane cells via the spike proteins. So theoretically, the virus may not enter the system or may not attach and inject its genetic material to trigger the infectious response. But if you were to sample the nasal pharynx or the oral cavity at that time, there's a possibility you may detect virus. And there's also a possibility that the host is not getting sick, but that there may be a possibility of transmitting the virus to someone else if it's there. And that for reason, right at the moment, we're recommending that once you've been vaccinated, don't throw away your masks. We still have to use the same precautions that we've been talking about until we know that the incidence of the disease is sufficiently lowered in the general population where it seems safe for everybody to start living a more normal life, and that's the ultimate goal. But again, if you look at other vaccines, you may get a much milder case, and that's a benefit. Or you may end up getting a subclinical case where you're not aware of it and you go on and live your life, but the vaccine has prevented the virus from causing severe pneumonitis. Vishnu, what's your thoughts on this, or how do you like to explain it to people?
I think if the prevalence of disease is very high in the community, you're going to end up wearing masks until you have significant herd immunity. Then you should see the prevalence come down, because you may transmit virus nasally, not in huge viral loads, but enough to potentially infect someone who is immunocompromised next to you. The question is, asymptomatic carriage is where we think a lot of the vaccine transmission the COVID transmission is taking place. So you're going to wear masks until the prevalence of disease is low in the community. That's fundamentally what we're going to do. But I would urge everyone to become a trusted messenger. We will have the slides available for folks in the next few days. And I would urge that as CMS organizes more of these talks, you become part of the Speakers Bureau and volunteer at least an hour of your time every other week or every third week, whenever you can. That would be great, because we need more of the folks who are interested in getting everybody vaccinated, so we can dispense of our masks hopefully sooner rather than later. There will be lots of vaccine by late summer, and so we have to convince these vaccine hesitants, which are still 30% of the population out there. And as the viral dynamics are changing with a more transmissible virus, we may need more and more herd immunity. We may need upwards of 80% herd immunity to get us out of this whole mess that we're in. So I certainly like to thank everybody. There are great questions out there. One is, no one knows what happens post-COVID vaccine with respect to carriage and transmission. That's true. We don't have enough data yet. We will have data soon. I think one of the problems with this information age is everybody wants data immediately. There is a chat about the physician who passed away with basically, it looks like severe thrombocytopenia and in relationship to the vaccination. My only comment is I don't think we know enough about that case to make a real point of it, whether it's related to the vaccine or not. So, I'd like to thank Ed, who's got to go for another meeting. So thank you, Ed, for your time and enlightening everybody about vaccination during pregnancy. One last question, Ed. Sterility. That was the other one that slipped my mind. Lots of questions about sterility in this vaccination.
There is no biological reason why it would occur. There is some concern that there may be impaired reproductive performance following the natural infection, especially with these long haul and chronic inflammation in the body. So again, if I reiterate the point, I don't fear the vaccine, but I fear the natural infection.
Thank you, Ed. That was basically it. I mean, there's a lot of misinformation out there. There are a whole host of anti-vaxxers out there that are spreading disinformation, and so we need to get our message out. So, Ted, can you talk a little bit about Ted Kanellakis is the CEO of CMS? Could you talk about, for the last minute, what the trusted messenger, the multifaceted approach that we're going to take to this?
Sure. Thank you, Dr. Chundy, and thank you for all of you joining this evening. Our Trusted Messenger campaign is underway, and we do have our website at vaccinetrust.org. So if you haven't registered through it, please visit the website and register through it tonight. We are partnering with our sports teams here in Chicago. And they'll be reaching out to their athletes to pair them up with our members in the underserved communities. And we've got a social media campaign that is structured to target those audiences to help them understand the safety and efficacy of the vaccine. So over the next few days, we'll be reaching out to all of our members and asking all of you to assist us with your relationships in your communities as well, and in the underserved. Dr. Chundy, is there anything in particular that you wanted me to share?
That was it, that we're going to have this campaign and we need your help, basically, to reiterate it again. Very good.
Yes, and the sports teams are very excited to partner with us, just so all of you are aware of it. Dr. Chundy and I met with them earlier this week. By the next morning, all the teams were on board to help us out.
So I'd like to thank everyone for their participation and taking an hour out of their precious day to do this. When we'll be reaching out to you, we'll have a slide deck, we'll have handout materials in multiple languages. We certainly want to reach the ethnic communities out there. And if you have special language skills, whether it's Polish, whether it's Spanish, whether it's Romanian, because we are the mixing bowl here, that would be great. We need everyone out there to help. Thank you. Dr. Butt, did you have anything to say? I saw Dr. Butt show up. Oh, there he is. There he is. I forgot. He's the president of the Chicago Medical Societies. Dr. Butt has to unmute. Natalie, can you give him privilege to unmute?
Yes, Ruby's in control tonight. So Ruby, can you make him a co-host so he can unmute himself?
There you go.
So yeah, I just wanted to thank, it was a great presentation on behalf of Chicago Medical Society. Dr. Chundy, thank you so much. Dr. Lynn, Dr. Johnson, and Ted, and the staff. We have been working hard, and we would love for you all to become trusted messenger, as Dr. Chundy mentioned, and develop all this coalition. We cannot do it alone. We all have to come together. So that's have a great night. Thank you so much, you all, for your patience and joining us. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.
Have a good night. Thanks.